Hello friends, it is time to re-review the HK P30. Despite all of the insults I've hurled at this gun over the years, it was all done with genuine affection and great love. I adore this gun. I originally reviewed it a few years ago, and the sound and lighting really sucked. My videos still suck, but hopefully they're slightly easier on the senses these days. In addition to being a review, this video will also serve as a 6,000 round update. I've had this gun for about 3 years, so I don't shoot it as often as some of the others, but it still gets very regular use. I really shouldn't like this gun, and there's a lot that I don't like about it, yet I love the gun and recommend it to anyone who will listen. So what the fuck gives, Gun Penguin, I hear you saying? Well, this gun is a lot like the HBO series Game of Thrones. Maybe you've heard of it. Lots of elements of the show aren't very good. The early seasons are ridiculous, with terrible special effects, vapid, titty-filled exposition, which isn't as fun as it sounds. It's just gratuitous. You almost get bored of the fantasy titties after a while, and if boobies are getting boring, you are absolutely deploying them in an uninformed fashion. But I digress. This isn't the place for titty tangents. Game of Thrones is also a mixed bag of pacing, strange casting swaps, and mishmash tone. Is this violent death scene supposed to be serious or funny? Yet when all those elements are combined with all the elements that really work, you have perhaps the greatest television show of all time. Even with the finale, which I happen to love, get off my dick, all right? Game of Thrones is probably the greatest show ever made. It's a goddamn masterpiece. In much the same way, the HK P30 is also a masterpiece. The trigger is bad. Why is that trigger trough here? And why is this gun the size that it is? Is it a compact or a full size? When you're at the range ringing steel like the bells of King's Landing, none of that shit matters. This gun is fucking awesome, and it doesn't hurt that it's insanely reliable. Oh yeah, and the P30, albeit the L model with the longer slide, is John Wick's primary pistol of choice in the first film, and that's pretty damn cool. Features. The P30 is HK's most recent and arguably flagship hammer-fire double-action, single-action polymer pistol. This gun is available in the usual host of HK configurations with a safety lever, LEM, all of that shit. My particular P30 is the V3, meaning it has no safety, only the decocker. Speaking of, the decocker is this little button on the back of the gun here. I will sing its praises later in the video. But really, find me a better decocker. It is incredibly awesome. This pistol is available in 9mm and 40 Smith & Wesson. The barrel is 3.85 inches long, and the gun weighs a hair over 26 ounces. Despite the short barrel, the gun is tall, like a full-size pistol. In many ways, it's more the size of a Glock 19X or 45, which is my favorite Glock. This gun has front slide serrations and a generous number of accessory rail slots up here. It comes standard with those luminous sights that you charge with your light, though you can buy these with the Meprolite night sight straight from the factory. That's what the luminous ones look like. You kind of charge them. And actually, let's do that. It's kind of fun. I probably just whacked the shit out of the camera, but yeah, so you charge them. Look at how brightly those glow. So that's great and all, but they're not traditional night sights. You do have to charge them, and by the time we're done just with this section of the video, they will probably not be glowing very brightly anymore. The magazine release is the usual ambidextrous HK paddles. There and there. I find it best to actuate the one on the right side with my index finger. I think that just works best for me. Whatever works for you works. Under the trigger is this little trough channel thing. I don't know if that's gonna come through on the video. I might have to take a picture. But anyway, HK says this prevents one's gloves from being caught under the trigger. In actual practice, it just eats the fucking skin off your trigger finger. This grip is insanely comfortable. And you can swap the side panels in addition to the back strap. So that's pretty cool. I haven't actually swapped them though, because I find the stock grip combination to be absolutely perfect. But if you want to, you can swap them in as many different combinations and permutations and otherations that you like. It's a great idea. I like the texturing on the grip too. It's not too extreme, but it still works great. The texture is sort of akin to the skateboard tape decals that folks put on grips anyway, only not quite as rough. It's very nice. These slide levers are nice and huge and ambidextrous, much like the paddles. Let's look inside the gun and see how this one is held up for over 6,000 rounds. We can also take a look at some of the internal features. So how has the P30 held up? Well, externally, I think it's in pretty damn good shape. What do you think? There are a few wear marks here and there, but nothing crazy. Yeah, not bad. So to disassemble the gun, we are going to pull the slide back to this notch here. And then we're going to push this pin through, just like other HKs. So let's do that. Let's get that to where it goes. And then we're going to push that forward and grab it. I'm going to have to pull it closer to my body to pull it all the way out. And then I'm sure I whacked the shit out of the camera again. And you can see when you've got the pin pulled out far enough, you can see this red indicating that you don't need to go any further than that. That's right, this pin is captive, unlike other HK pins which come all the way out, meaning that you could potentially lose them. It's genius. So this could also be used to show you that you haven't reassembled the gun correctly, or it could just tell you that you've pushed it through. Very useful. Let's face it, I'm a dum-dum, truly the dregs of human intellect, and I like knowing that I won't have to scour my knockoff eBay Persian rugs for a little black pin, at least when I'm cleaning this particular gun. We all know that small gun parts can easily leave this realm of existence to forever reside in the parts dimension, a hellish mirror of this reality, filled with AR-15 detent springs, roll pins, Glock front sight screws, and action figure guns. These items will never be seen in this corner of reality again, at least until the veil grows thin and they can return once more, usually when you're moving to a new house or about 3 years after you've replaced the original part. So once that pin is moved outward, you can remove the slide from the frame. Like so. Very easy. Let me figure out a way to position this on the desk where we can actually see everything. I wiped all of the lubricant and cleaned the gun prior to filming to help us see the wear. Looking in the polymer HKs, you immediately notice that the frame contains very few parts. There's just not much to them. The simplicity makes them very easy to detail strip, and there's not much that can really go wrong in here. You can see the takedown pin, part of the slide release. You can see how that works. In the open position, there's this channel in the center, letting the locking block at the back of the guide rod move through. When the bar is pushed in, that channel is out of the way, and this rounded portion sits inside the cutout on the locking block. Right there. I hope you can see that. And that holds the slide on the gun. It's very elegant. Speaking of the guide rod, you've probably noticed this flappity nylon doodad. This is the recoil buffer ring, which replaced the more complex spring buffer from the USP series. The simpler buffer ring first appeared in the USP Compact and is what you see in the P30, the P2000, the HK45s, but not the small guns. Those have the dual spring setup. HK seems to feel that this ring works as well as the more complicated springs, and we'll talk a bit more about whether or not it actually does later. So we see substantial wear on the locking block. Nothing crazy, but it's there. Taking the barrel out, we see where the barrel rubs inside the slide, just like you would expect. None of that's abnormal. And then inside the gun, we see substantial wear on the slide. But again, none of it is abnormal for this round count. This doesn't show on camera, but there is very little wear inside the frame rails. Like all HK barrels, this one is very nice. It's cold hammer forged with polygonal rifling. I don't shoot cast lead bullets, so I prefer the benefits of polygonal rifling. I think it's just the way to go. Really, who's shooting cast lead bullets these days? Looking at the wear on the frame, the plastic that's on the side of the rails on HK frames always wears, but it doesn't affect. Sorry, I was pointing there to the bar. I mean there. It doesn't affect the way the gun actually performs, but they all wear like that. I've never had one that didn't. It's not a big deal, but I know that's folks online will freak out about that, but it's totally normal. In general, I found that cosmetically, HK's finish doesn't hold up as well to wear compared to something like Walther's Tenifer process. But the finish impregnates the metal, so though there might be wear marks, you're not actually losing any durability. There's never been a spot of rust on any of my HKs, and some of them have been used very hard, for a civilian anyway. I recently had to excavate mud from this gun's extractor area, and even that level of mud caking didn't impede its function. It's very sturdy. All right, now let's put it back together. Goes back together exactly the way you would expect. Line the pinhole back up, pop it through. All good. And now a shameless plug. If you like my videos, please consider supporting me on Patreon. YouTube is no supporter of the Second Amendment, and nearly all of my videos are instantly demonetized. Reviews and endurance testing videos are expensive to make. I refuse to fire only 200 rounds through a gun and put up a review. I can't do it that way. If I review a gun, I've extensively tested it, and that costs money. Your generous support helps me do that. I'm honored to welcome Tracy and Sheldon to the Gun Penguin family. Y'all are awesome. Thank you so much for your support. So why should you choose the P30? The P30 is interesting because it really competes with three kinds of pistols: the polymer striker-fired guns, the metal-framed hammer-fired DASA guns, and the polymer DASA guns. This gun's polymer hammer-fired competitors are things like the FNX, that's really hard to say, the CZ P07, and the CZ Phantom. Those are awesome guns. The HK is certainly more durable than the Phantom, though. It's also built to a higher standard than the P07. I haven't spent as much time with the FNX, but the ones that I've shot seem like great guns. Those guns don't feel as nice as the HK, but they do all have better triggers than this. That's not saying much, though. The P30's trigger is awful. But the P30 is extraordinarily reliable. While my CZs have been reliable guns, they have not been built to HK standards, and the parts just aren't as durable. The CZ snobs can fight it out with the HK snobs in the comments. It'll be handlebar mustaches on fixed-geared bicycles versus, I don't know, Caucasian dentists and BMWs. May the biggest douche win. But the HK is twice the price, right? Well, not after the price drop. A few years ago, I think it was in early 2017, HK dropped the prices of many of their pistols, the P30 included. These can now be found for, I don't know, $550 to $650, sometimes less. I actually only paid $500 for this one brand new. I don't know when you're watching this, though, and prices fluctuate, so if you don't see one for $650 on Gunbroker on whatever day exactly when you're watching, don't get all emotionally wrecked about it. I don't often mention price because y'all can be fragile and will get super mad if the price changes over time. At that price, though, this gun is a steal and is definitely the way to go. But what about metal-framed double-action, single-action guns like the 92, the CZ SP01 Tactical, the SIG 226, etc.? Well, those guns all have vastly superior triggers, even the CZ, which is a little rough straight from the factory. They also weigh far more. The Berettas, though, depending on which one you choose, like the M9A3 or the 92X, and the 226, again, depending on which one you select, they can be substantially more expensive than the P30 these days. And those metal guns, though, they do offer a nicer firing experience overall. So why compare this thing to striker-fired guns? It has a hammer, after all. Well, that's because of the intent of the P30's design. This gun was built to be bomb-proof with an emphasis on reliability and function over aesthetics. The trigger pull, even in single-action mode, is pretty long and gritty, a far cry from the usual crisp single-action pulls we expect from hammer-fired guns. The frame is polymer and nearly indestructible. The gun isn't beautiful, but good luck killing it. When we compare this thing to a striker-fired gun like a Glock, suddenly the trigger isn't too bad. It's just pretty okay. The P30 has no external safety, like a striker-fired gun, and even the decocker is a little button tucked away at the back of the gun, like we've said. By the way, this, again, it's the best decocker design ever, in my opinion. I'd say this gun, especially in its LEM configuration, compares pretty damn favorably to the PPQ, the Glocks, the P10C, that sort of thing. The only thing that you have to look out for is that first double-action shot. You get the hang of it pretty fast, though. I've noticed that when I hand this gun to fans of polymer striker-fired guns, they tend to enjoy it. They might hate something like my beloved Berettas, but odds are good they'll actually enjoy this one. Something about the spongy trigger and delightfully grippy polymer frame is just very familiar to Glock fans, and I'm certainly a Glock fan. This gun is great for PPQ fans, too. Both the P30 and the PPQ have that very comfortable grip contouring, although the PPQ's trigger is way fucking better than this gun's. Anyhow, if you normally hate hammer-fired guns, this is one that you absolutely might like. So why should you choose this HK? Deciding which HK to choose can be difficult. If you're looking for a 9mm, you're choosing between the USP, the USP Compact, the P2000, and the P30. All of those are great guns. I found them to be of equal reliability. I guess it really comes down to size and what you plan to do with the gun. Some simple stuff out of the way first. The P2000 and USP Compact are smaller and easier to carry. The P2000's grip is smoother on the side so as to not rub your skin off. The USPs have very comfortable grips to me, but lots of folks find them to be excessively thick and absolutely hate them, so keep that in mind. Speaking of the USP, it's a testament to that gun's greatness that even after like 30 years, that gun is still considered by many to be the pinnacle of boom boom technology, and it is very cool in its way. The USP is a lot like Charlie Sheen. It was more relevant in the 90s, and though it should by all rights be dead by now, it's still bizarrely popular. There's a large contingent of HK fans who firmly believe that the company hasn't made anything good since, or at least anything that matches the USP. These same folks say these new pistols are like most of the Rolling Stones records after Some Girls, simply a rehash of old ideas repackaged. With the USP, you can install the match trigger kit, giving it a very nice trigger. The P30 trigger is shit, and the P2000 trigger is somewhere in the middle. This is the point where one of those super anal HK fans who can recite HK facts but doesn't actually fire their HKs, pops up to say that the P2000 and the P30 essentially have the same trigger. Yes, the parts are interchangeable, but due to many factors, the triggers don't feel exactly the same. My P2000 had measurably shorter reset, a crisper break, and a smoother DA pull. My P30 has less over travel, but everything else is worse. All the ones I've felt have those characteristics. The difference is subtle, but it is present. The USP feels chunky but reassuring. I find that gun very pleasant to use and shoot, but I don't like where the safety decocker lever is located. My hands are sized in such a way that with a thumb's forward grip, that lever just bashes the inside of my thumb. Any extended range session leaves me with a bruise and a blister. The HK-45 with hot ammo is even worse, but I love that gun so I shoot it anyway. One long firing session with that gun wore a hole in the skin right there. That kind of sucked. The P30, depending on configuration, has no levers on the side, like mine. That's the V3, I believe. But it has its own inexplicable issue. That trough beneath the trigger, where the USP and P2000 don't have a trough, also eats the skin off my trigger finger, though to a lesser degree than the USP safety batters my thumb. Very irritating, though. The trough is dumb. The P30 has the most comfortable grip of the three. By far, it feels very slim and the grip has the right amount of texture. It grips without rubbing your side raw, though it isn't as comfortable to wear all day as the P2000. So which one should you get? Just get whichever HK pistol is most appealing to you. I can't choose, so I have several. They all have their pros and cons, but the P30 is awesome. How has the P30 performed? Flawlessly. I've had no malfunctions. When I first bought this gun, I didn't much like it. I bought it because it was an HK for $500, and I'd always been kind of curious about this model. For the first few thousand rounds, I didn't clean it or look after it. I kind of wanted to see it fail. I'd take it to the range and marvel at how much the trigger sucks. I'd get it muddy and kind of wait to see it malfunction, but it never did, and slowly it won me over. Now, I love the damn thing despite myself. I ultimately value reliability over everything else, and as I've used it, I came to grasp what this gun actually is, and it's a modern hammer-fired pistol that will survive anything. If sturdiness is this gun's primary concern, safety and usability are pretty damn high on the list too. Like the Glock, this is a gun for anyone. What I mean is there are no external levers, just the decocker, and even that one is gone depending on the model. The trigger is extremely forgiving in a way that a better trigger would not be. There are no confusing controls, and you can easily manipulate the gun with little firearms experience. So let's start by talking about how easy it is to manipulate the controls. It's incredibly easy to pull the slide back. There's barely any resistance. I don't know of any 9mm that's easier to rack. A lady friend of mine who likes to shoot says this gun is the easiest 9mm she's ever racked, and she noted this before I pointed out how light it is. The slide levers are nice and big and very easy to actuate. The ambidextrous magazine release paddles are easy to find with your finger, or you can do it with your thumb. I think it's easier to do it with your index finger. Paddle magazine release levers are my preference over buttons. I find them to be much quicker and I don't have to adjust my firing grip. I wish every pistol had paddles. And the decocker, man. Little button on the back of the gun beneath the hammer. It's the best decocker I've ever used. You're probably sick of me saying it. On most HKs, the safety decocking lever eats the side of my thumb. Something about the way my hand is shaped, This gun, in this particular version at least, has no levers. It's nice and smooth, free of clutter, like a modern striker-fired gun. Just awesome. This lets me have my grip exactly the way I want it for both performance and comfort. My thumbs occasionally block the slide release from engaging, as again, the levers are very long, but it's really easy to work around this. Now, I've mentioned several times that the trigger is awful. Let's take a look at what makes it awful, and why that really doesn't matter, or is perhaps maybe even an asset. In the past, I've heavily criticized the trigger, and a few of you got very, very upset with me about this. If you own one of these and such criticisms of a metal and plastic object make you feel like I'm attacking you personally, you might want to watch something else, like a Hickok video, or better yet, take a moment for some self-reflection to examine why such things make you so angry. Let's start with the double action pull. HKs, with the exception of the USPs with the match trigger, have long, heavy trigger pulls. So the P30's DA pull isn't especially bad relative to its siblings, though it is a little more gritty. When you first buy the gun, after a few thousand rounds, it'll feel like other HKs. That is to say, not great. Certainly not something spectacular. Yeah, long, stiff, totally workable. Let's see that again. And again. The single action pull, though, is quite atrocious. There's a lot of take up. An abnormal amount. Most triggers have some take up, but not that much. You pull the trigger rearward through the slop, and then you reach what feels like a wall. Only it isn't. I don't know if you can see that, but it's the beginning of more creaky slop. If I'm careful, I can actually push the trigger around in that wide area of creep. Yeah, that's a lot of creep. Continue rearward, and somewhere in there, the trigger breaks. Luckily, there's not too much over travel, though there is some. Let's see that again. Pull, 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 snap. The trigger pull just isn't satisfying. It feels plasticky and cheap. The reset, though, is the motherfucking worst. It is really bad, hilariously so. It damn near takes you back to the start of the single action travel, way past the wall, back to the beginning of the initial sloppy take up. But it does have an audible and tactile click. Let's see that again. Release, release, release. Wow, that's far. And there's the wall way back there, if you can call it a wall. Here's what it looks like at speed. And I've mentioned that trigger trough. That thing rubs my finger raw. If you shoot this gun all the time, it'll stop bothering you. You'll kind of build up a callus, but that takes time. HK says the trough prevents gloves from getting stuck under the trigger. I'm not a fancy operator, man, so I don't know if that was a problem with the USP or P2000, which don't have the trough, but I've never had that problem wearing gloves with those guns. I don't get it, and I'd like to see that removed. There are companies that will remove it for you, but the work that I've seen looks weird. You can tell that somebody dremeled some shit out of the gun in there. It's no good. HK needs to remove the trough from the design and all future designs. Also worth noting, some folks say that these paddles rub their finger. They kind of rise up a little bit. They're just a little bit proud of the guard there. I've never had that problem, though I do slightly prefer the feel of the older USP and P2000 style paddles, just out of sheer familiarity. As for the grip, I can wax poetic about this gun's Spider-Man themed grip for hours, but I'll keep it short. It looks ugly, but it feels superb. This is one of the most comfortable handgun grips on the market. It is so awesome. It's up there, possibly surpassing the PPQ, but only because the P30 has better texturing. With the stock panels installed, this grip fits my hand amazingly well. It is incredible. If only the trigger were as good as the PPQ's trigger. But enough already. How does the damn thing shoot? When you fire the gun, you come to see that it's more than the sum of its parts and problems. The design decisions begin to make sense, with the exception of that goddamn trigger trough, which is clearly Satan's work. Satan often does great work, giving us the best things in life, from gross sex to Grader's French pot ice cream to the Rolling Stones' finest work, Exile on Main Street, or maybe Sticky Fingers, Depends on when you ask me. Oh, and the works of Caravaggio should probably make my Satan list. But in this case, Satan did us dirty, leaving us with this awful trigger trough. Anyhow, when you fire the gun, the recoil impulse is so smooth. That buffer, though only a tiny nylon ring, makes recoil an understated push, far softer than you would expect it to be with a gun that has such a high bore axis. In fact, you won't even notice the bore axis. It's almost like the clever and comfortable geometry of the grip kind of help you position your hand naturally to control the recoil. I'm not saying this gun magically has less recoil than other guns. Instead, the muzzle just stays comparably flat to guns with very low bore axes, guns like the P10C and the Glock. There's just not a lot of muzzle flip. Taking long shots, you immediately notice that the trigger isn't a hindrance. Why not? Well, the slop gives the trigger kind of a rolling break, making it more like a striker-fired gun, the guns that we're all very accustomed to firing in 2019, making the trigger characteristics oddly familiar in the heat of the moment. That rolling break lets you shoot the gun pretty damn fast, and I find doubles and triples to be a breeze with this gun, at least as breezy as they can be in my rather inept hands. It's just easy to shoot it well. The reset is long, but that disappears when you're at the range, and you soon adjust to releasing your finger a little farther forward, and hell, some folks don't care about reset at all anyway, but I do. The paddle magazine release makes changing magazines a breeze, and though the magwell isn't flared in the traditional sense, the opening is generous, and magazines never get hung. See what I mean? There's a lot of wiggle room. The Wiggle Room is the name of the worst strip club. As I used this gun, it became more apparent to me why the trigger is the way it is. Sure, it's partly to make the gun feel more like a striker-fired gun, and partly to pass stringent European drop testing, but it's largely to make the gun safer. Under duress, our fine motor skills are gone. We make big, clumsy, gross motor movements. We make mistakes, and this trigger forgives those mistakes, as much as a trigger can, anyway. The DA pull is long and deliberate. We know that, fair enough. But even the SA pull is deliberate. And with that slop, if you decide not to take the shot, you have a lot of room in there to change your mind. You're not resting your trigger on a very final, potentially very deadly wall with a flinch separating your finger from the round going off. And that reset, shitty as it is, prevents you from accidentally sending a second unintended bullet out of the gun. The PPQ has probably my favorite striker-fired trigger. It's light with a supremely short reset. But I've seen several people, myself included when I first got the gun, ride the reset and accidentally fire a pair when we intended to fire a single. The chances of that happening with the P30 are extremely slim. Anything's possible, but that reset is going to help prevent that. Look, we all have different levels of training, different levels of commitment to the craft of shooting well, and the P30's trigger, lack of excess external levers and shit, and what controls are there being very large and easy to use make this gun a pleasure for anyone with any level of training to operate. And it's also going to be safe for anyone with any level of training to operate. By the way, there's the P30L, which has a slightly longer slide and therefore longer sight radius. I personally tend to prefer shorter slides because there's less reciprocating mass on top of the gun. For me, smaller slides often translate to a softer recoil impulse, especially when coupled with a longer grip like the P30 has. But many people prefer the way the P30L shoots, so I figured I'd mention it. The L model is somewhat rarer and frequently more expensive because John Wick uses that pistol in the first movie fitted with that crazy compensator. So what would I change about the P30? I'm not sure I'd change the trigger. I know you think I want to, but I really don't know anymore. I think it's fine as it is. Instead, I wish HK would make a matched trigger kit, much like the one for the USP. That way, we could have it all. The trigger trough has to go. Why is it even there? HK knows we don't like it. Enough folks are also bothered by the magazine release paddle design that HK might want to consider returning to the older USP style paddles. I'm not bothered by these at all, but again, you might be. I wish this gun came in an optics-ready version. The P30 is difficult to cut for optics because there's a ton of open space inside the gun. There's just not that much metal in the slide. If you've ever researched having one of these milled, you also know how expensive it is. It'd be nice to see HK develop a factory optics solution. They tend to be slow on most things, and they've been slower than most in catching on to the optics trend. And while we're addressing optics and sights, I wish the standard sights had a shelf here to use to rack the slide. I'm going to change these out for Trijicon HD XRs, as is my custom on guns that I like and shoot often, which will take care of that problem for me, but this is an issue that I would like for HK to solve at the factory for everyone. With SIG including night sights as standard on most models, I wish HK would consider following suit. Final thoughts. I love this gun. What more can I say? It's been extremely reliable, and I see no reason to doubt that it will be anything other than reliable in the future. The P30 is a pleasure to use, a real treat in the hand if you've spent years shooting guns with kind of squarish grips. As we've discussed, this gun is very safe and easy to use, and goddamn it, nearly everyone who tries it loves it, shitty trigger and all. Even the price is reasonable these days. But the real reason you want this gun, and the real reason that I bought it in the first place, is that it's very cool. This gun is an HK. There's a certain cachet that comes with a gun like this, even if the prices drop to put it in line with most other guns out there. It's still an HK. It's still John Wick's gun. It's cool. It feels cool, and you look cool shooting it. Maybe it says something about you as a person. Maybe you and I are kind of douchebags for enjoying ridiculous German firearms. Maybe we just like fancy shit. Or maybe it's fun to shoot something different now and then. I love my Glocks. They're awesome, but sometimes we all need a change. Maybe sometimes striker-fired guns in general get boring and you need something different. Maybe a double-action, single-action gun is just more your speed. Whatever your reason for wanting this gun, know that you're getting a great pistol. It feels great, it looks cool, and it'll serve you well for many decades, even under the worst of conditions. Really, what more could you want from a handgun? Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful evening. I'll talk to you soon. Good night.